Well, hello, and welcome back to the Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we journey chapter by chapter through C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. This is chapter 7 of The Silver Chair, The Hill of Strange Trenches.
Are you lighting a candle?
I am lighting a candle. This episode begins in...
Where did you get a candle?
This episode begins in a very cold, chilly way and ends with the delight of a warm fire. So I thought I'd light this nice candle, make our podcast 4D.
Nice. Yeah. Yes, excellent. It smells like pumpkin pie.
It does. It smells good. We should let it here. I'll set it over here and we'll let it burn during the episode.
Excellent. Oh, we should have done this a long time ago.
Yeah, we should. What are we talking about again?
Something about Narnia.
Narnia. That is something we've been doing for the last couple of years now. Right. We are here, chapter 7 of The Silver Chair. This is almost the halfway point of the book, and this is almost the halfway mark of our coverage of the Chronicles of Narnia.
A real turning point.
Yeah, I think next episode actually is the real halfway mark, but we're close.
It's good to be prepared.
Yeah, I'll probably forget about it the next time we record. So,
speaking of forgetting, what happened last chapter?
That is a great segue. So in chapter 6, the company of three, which is Puddleglum, Eustace, and Jill, they traveled across the Ettonsmoor on their way to, what was supposed to be looking for Prince Rilian, and it has now changed into finding the House of Harfang. So it's an odd chapter, which means I have the chapter summary. Here we go. The three travelers endure a grueling trek through a snowstorm in their final approach to the House of Harfang. In the middle of the storm, they encounter oddly symmetrical rock formations and strange trenches that seemingly lead nowhere. Jill misremembers the order of the four signs and becomes frustrated with Puddleglum's persistent pessimism. Eventually, the three arrive at Harfang. They are greeted by the porter, a giant, who welcomes them into the large, warm home. Jill explains that they were sent by the Lady of the Green Kirtle, and a young giant is sent off to bring this message to the king and queen. While they are waiting, Jill and Eustace raise their spirits by the light of the burning fire. Puddleglum finds his own spirits raised at the bottom of a strong drink. With the two children warm and Puddleglum delirious, the three are brought before the king and queen.
Well done. Exactly 150 words.
It is, yeah.
Nice.
Was that your research for the chapter?
Yeah. I can't wait to talk about the part with Puddleglum, but let's start at the beginning.
Okay. It's a very good place to start.
They're very cold. And it's pretty miserable. And I think that it's so well described that we can really understand why they may have made some of the choices that they've made that led them to Harfang.
Mm-hmm. Tell me more about that.
So they're really cold, they're wet, they're tired. And they get a little bit of a break from that when they kind of go down into this trench type place. Then they get out and they realize that they really were miserable because they're able to hear each other and they started to defrost a little bit. And now they see lights and they see fire and they are really excited. And at least the two children are. I think Puddleglum's still a little cautious.
He gets excited by the end of this chapter.
He does. He kind of says, well, this is already a silly thing to do, and then lets his guard down completely.
Yeah. The beginning of this chapter is interesting because there is a very long descriptive section. And that stood out to me because we haven't often seen very long descriptive sections. The thing that I thought of, actually, and maybe it's just because there's snow, is Lucy's first introduction into Narnia in chapter 1 of Wardrobe, where there's that long descriptive section as she's pushing through the wardrobe, and it's iconic. I don't need to describe it. And she sees the lamppost for the first time with Tumnus under it. Did this stand out to you at all?
It did. 2 pages of no dialogue at all for the most part, and it really paints a picture, and I think it increases the isolation and the feeling that they must have had while they were there.
Yeah.
Because there is no conversation. We find out that part of that is you can't hear anything, so there's no point in talking. They're pretty tired of shouting.
And I want to read a paragraph or two from this descriptive section. At about 10 o'clock, the first tiny snowflakes came loitering down and settled on Jill's arm. 10 minutes later, they were falling quite thickly. In 20 minutes, the ground was noticeably white. By the end of half an hour, a good steady snowstorm, which looked as if it meant to last all day, was driving in their faces so that you could hardly see. In order to understand what followed, you must keep on remembering how little they could see. As they drew near the low hill which separated them from the place where the lighted windows had appeared, they had no general view of it all. It was a question of seeing the next few paces ahead, and even for that, you had to screw up your eyes. Needless to say, they were not talking. When they reached the foot of the hill, they caught a glimpse of what might be rocks on each side, squarish rocks, if you looked at them carefully, but no one did. All were more concerned with the ledge right in front of them, which barred their way. It was about 4 feet high. The marsh wiggle, with his long legs, had no difficulty in jumping onto the top of it, and he then helped the others up. It was a nasty wet business for them, though not for him, because the snow now lay quite deep on the ledge. They then had a stiff climb. Jill fell once, up very rough ground for about 100 yards, and came to a second ledge. There were 4 of these ledges altogether at quite irregular intervals.
Sounds like a staircase.
The reason I wanted to read this is because I want to know what your thoughts are as a first-time reader. This has to be odd for you.
It is odd. They're describing something that I don't feel like we've seen before.
Okay.
I haven't read a ton of fantasy, but it does seem pretty otherworldly and pretty unique.
What do you think Lewis is doing here with that?
Making a staircase. What do you think he's doing?
I'm going to abstain from answering that question. But you were thinking this sounds like some kind of staircase to somewhere.
Yeah, they're definitely on a different level now.
Do you think these are steps made by giants? It seems weird that there are such evenly squarish rocks here.
Right. Yeah, I wonder. I feel like a few times throughout this chapter, Lewis is giving us little hints that are going to make sense in a chapter or two.
Do you think this is some kind of foreshadowing?
Yeah, where like we'll have little elements where something's not quite right, or you know how in a movie they'll have little things that just they make sense once you understand the twist, and then you go back and you watch it a second time and you're like, oh, I should have seen that. After you read enough stories and see enough movies, you start seeing the obvious thing they're doing.
Yeah.
Sometimes, and that's what this feels like. But I don't know if that'll actually pan out.
Yeah, Lewis doesn't try to hide his foreshadowing all that much, which makes sense. This is a book written for children. Yeah. He makes this one line I wanted to point out where he says, they were squarish rocks if you looked at them closely, but no one did. All were more concerned with the ledge right in front of them, which barred their way. So he's making some kind of allusion to they're missing something. And that's not a spoiler. Get into that. It's pretty clear that at some point along the way, and we can actually name what that point is, when they get to the bridge and meet the Lady of the Green Kirtle, and she puts this idea of Harfang into their heads, they really have fixed their eyes, if we want to quote Hebrews 12 here, on the wrong thing. They were given a quest. They know what they're supposed to do. Aslan literally gave them 4 signs. I mean, this is, he's like, here's the 4 things you have to do in this book. And they've already gotten off task. They've not gotten a single sign right. And Lewis is alluding to the fact that something is being missed. And they're so focused on their own comfort and this thing that has nothing to do with the quest that they have forgotten what they're here for.
Right. Yep. And it's important to see that there's a mix. He's very clear about how they are missing signs and how they've already forgotten them. And it even has Puddleglum bring it up, and they react pretty harshly to that.
Yeah, let's talk about his pessimism here. So Jill falls down into one of these trenches, and Eustace is trying to see if she's okay, and Jill seems to be mostly all right. She's not hurt. And Puddleglum he really comes in, kind of annoyingly here. Both of your legs are broken. He's like, this is probably a dragon's tunnel. There might be beetles or slugs. And what a couple of chapters ago was an enjoyable character trait, right now, he's almost taking any confidence or courage that Jill has, and he's persuading her out of that. I really like this about his character, because this is one of Lewis's best written characters in the way that his character traits are not black and white. He has this very, sometimes realistic, sometimes not realistic pessimism about him that both keeps the children safe sometimes. He, just last chapter, keeps Jill from revealing their plan to the Lady of the Green Kirtle. And whether she's friend or foe doesn't matter. Aslan gave you a task.
Safe.
You need to be safe. You don't know who you're meeting out here on the road. So in that sense, what he does is very wise, and he makes a good leader for these two humans. But then here, he's dampening their spirits when it's already such a difficult trek through the snowstorm. This is such a realistic part of being a human, or a marshwiggle, I should say. I think about this. Anna and I were talking about this as I was preparing for the chapter, and I was thinking about one of the things about me. I'm a relatively talkative guy. I think that probably comes through on the podcast. And there are times when that really can be a gift. I know that I like to make people feel comfortable. If we're going to like a party or a gathering and there's someone there who might be new or doesn't know a lot of people, I don't really mind striking up a conversation with anyone or working to make them feel welcomed in a space. And I think that's a good thing that I can do. But at the same time, there are other times where I completely dominate a conversation and then keep other people out. Even when I'm hopefully trying to welcome people in, I'm talking so much that it really pushes people away. And it doesn't mean that being talkative is inherently a good or bad thing, but there are times when that personality trait that I have can be both positive and negative. That's the same with Puddleglum here. Pessimism sounds so pejorative, so maybe that's not the right thing to call it. I mean, what else would we call it here?
I feel it's like pessimism is the best word.
Yeah, I don't know what else it is. Plus, I love the alliteration of Puddleglum's pessimism.
Right.
I'm not sure if our mic's like picking that up with all those...
the P sounds.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I also, some of the phrases that Puddleglum says, especially "I shouldn't wonder," start to really add up for me and start to drive me nuts too. Maybe it's because I'm envisioning myself walking through the snow and being really cold and miserable while I'm hearing this, but he seems to say it a lot. And he's not just muttering it to himself. He shouts at them, "Both legs broken. I shouldn't wonder," when she just fell down. It reminds me a little bit of The Great Gatsby when he keeps saying "old sport" over and over and over again. It's like, okay,
we get it. Yeah,
that's enough. That's the
thing
phrase. You say.
That's
That's your character. I gotcha. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I shouldn't know, or I shouldn't wonder, I guess, is Puddleglum's version of old sport here.
Yeah.
What do you think these trenches are, Phil? I know there's a lot happening here that is unclear, but this is the joy of the podcast.
Right.
What are these trenches? Do they belong to worms? Are they... that's Dune, sorry.
Yeah. Sounds like they're looking for spice.
Yeah.
I thought it may be a maze, an in-ground maze.
An in-ground maze.
Dug
for
out.
who?
Dung out, wow. Yeah, I thought maybe it was an inlaid maze for some reason, maybe to provide a shortcut or something, or maybe to keep like some half man, half beast creature hidden.
I mean, we can't put it past it. There's a lot of Greek mythology, I mean, all kinds of mythology here in the story.
From.
Yeah.
That was my guess.
So Theseus is going to show up in just a little bit. You know,
Right.
Actually, we haven't mentioned this, but Lewis, we've regularly seen him pull from Greek mythology, but the idea of having giants in the north is a pretty clear allusion to Norse mythology, where you had the frost giants who were found further up north in Norse mythology. So I think this might be the first time we've seen Lewis pull from that, Scandinavian mythology. I don't know if that's happened before.
Yeah.
So eventually, these three characters, they make it through the snowstorm. It is not fun. They are already fighting with one another, as Puddleglum predicted that they would. And they do get in sight of Harfang. It's described not as a castle, but as a very, very large home. Lewis even points out that some of the doors are situated in a way that would not fortify it well. What does it look like to you? What do you imagine?
It sounds like there are windows very close to ground level.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't seem very secure, at least for the type of technology that they seem to have.
What was the giant architect thinking here?
Yeah, maybe likes a nice view, or maybe it was a fire standard. They got to keep everything up to code.
You think that's what it was? Caspian was like, "We'll make a treaty with the giants,
Right.
and
But they have to bring everything up.
they've gotta meet Narnian code.
Right.
You guys live over there in the Ettonsmore.
Stop parking in front of the hydrants.
Yeah, it's not safe. You can't park in front of the hydrants. Everybody knows that.
I think what's really happening here is the giants aren't really worried about being attacked.
They're giants.
If
Who's going to
someone
fight
breaks
them?
into their house, they're going to throw them out, and they're going to throw them a very far distance.
Later, we find out that their fire has literal trees inside of it.
Right.
If you can pick out a tree and put it in your fire, I don't think you're that concerned about anyone except other giants.
Right. There must be big windows, too. I'm assuming that everything in the house is to scale. I guess we'll find out soon. If the fireplace is that big, you would think that everything else is. And they weren't able to give a cup a little later on.
Mm-hmm.
Because they said you'll drown if I give you a cup of this stuff.
Yeah, we need to talk about the size of the giants here. I was going to bring this up later, but this is a great segue into it. How tall are these giants? Lewis tells us they are taller than an apple tree, but shorter than a telegraph pole, or telegram pole, I think.
Maybe this is because we live in the city, but I don't. Is a telegram pole the same as a telephone pole?
I'm looking out. We are on the second story of my home right now. We're looking out the window, and the telephone pole is much shorter than some of the trees outside.
Right. But I'm trying to remember for apple trees. I guess they don't go up that high.
So I looked it up.
Okay. Can I guess real quick?
Sure. Well, there's all different kinds of apple trees, so I took a rough estimate as to what we could average it out at.
I'm thinking that telephone pole is probably 23 feet. So an apple tree would be around 1920.
Well, what we're going to do actually is we're going to pause the podcast. We're going to go out and measure it. I've got a ladder. We're going to go outside. No, when I looked it up, it said a standard apple tree. I looked at 3 different sources. The first couple of clicks on Google.
This is the hard-hitting research.
That's what people come here for. They're excited to
for.
hear us Google things. And I found between 15 to 30 feet. So let's go ahead with, I don't know, let's say 23 feet.
Okay.
Let's
put it in meters just for our friends across the sea.
Oh, they can do that. Well, actually what's interesting is the word yard is used in this chapter.
Oh, yeah.
And I wonder if that is just here in the American version. I assume that it's not in the UK version, right? In the original text, Lewis isn't writing about yards.
Well, maybe.
I thought it was maybe like a Fenris Ulf Malgrim kind of thing, where it is different depending on what side of the Atlantic you're reading it on.
Yeah. If someone could please let us know what their UK version says.
If it does say meters there, I wonder. So let's imagine the giants are 23 feet tall. That's extremely tall.
That's very tall.
The pictures that Pauline Baines does, God bless her heart, they do not look 23 feet tall. At the very end of the chapter, there is a giant picking up Puddleglum. How tall do we think Puddleglum is? Over 6 feet, but...
I was thinking like a nice 7.5.
You think 7.5 feet?
Yeah, maybe 2 meters.
Puddleglum is not that much. Is not that much shorter than the giant.
In the picture, you're saying.
In the picture,
yeah. In
which
the description, it seems like he
seems way
much
bigger.
shorter. Yeah.
He's given a salt shaker to drink out of. I guess a salt cellar.
And what is that?
It's like the UK way of saying salt.
So it
salt.
is like
Why can't I say
like
that?
a shaker? Is it the little dish that you get a pinch of salt out of?
Exactly. So it's kind of a little dish. You would take the salt out with your fingers and put it on instead of picking it up and.
So I have one of those at my house.
Really?
It's not that much smaller than a cup.
But we have to assume that this one is because the giant gives it to him. But
okay,
we're getting way ahead of ourselves.
Maybe that's why he got drunk.
The problem is I'm having a hard time figuring out exactly how tall these giants are. It doesn't really matter.
Right.
But if you've got a tree in your fire, you've got to be pretty big.
Right.
How are they even able to hear the humans at this point? Are they getting really far down?
I imagine there's more shouting involved.
There's a lot more shouting. Okay.
Yeah, but also he wasn't able to hear Puddleglum kind of whispering to them.
That's true. Yeah.
Turned out to be a key part of the story.
Very, very. That's very important. Yeah, you're right. So let's go back to the arrival at Harfang. So they go up to meet the porter, and this is a very important moment for Puddleglum. I do not think that Lewis is being extravagant with his words when he points out Puddleglum's courage. We've often heard Puddleglum be called a wet blanket, and the children kind of write him off. And we might be tempted as readers to write Puddleglum off as just a wet blanket, like the kids call him, and say, oh, he's just pessimistic, he's just grumpy about everything. But as they get up to the door, even though he is not on board with this plan, Lewis points out that it's Puddleglum who shows the most courage. And the reason I think that is so important is that, and this kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier about Puddleglum's pessimism not just being this simple black or white, like good or bad kind of thing. We see that, yes, he has all these fears and he's afraid of the worst possible things happening. But when push comes to shove, this isn't a guy who's just going to run away from his responsibilities. He has taken on the task of leading the children to find Prince Rilian. And so when they get to Harfang, he's decided, we're already here. So as the resident Narnian, I will be the one who takes us up to the door. I will show courage. While when it's, Jill and Eustace, whose plan this was in the first place, are kind of like, I imagine they're kind of just standing behind him, letting him do all the talking because they're afraid.
Right. He does such a great, he literally just walks right up and bangs on the door and says, we're looking for a place to stay.
Yeah. Before we move on, I think this is a great place for us to pause for a little bit and talk about Jill and Eustace. Eustace, at this point, has really not been a significant part of the story, in my opinion.
He's just kind of walking along.
He's not useless, as Trumpkin would call him.
Yeah.
But he's mostly there playing off of Jill. Now, I mentioned at the very beginning of this book that, in my opinion, Jill is the clear protagonist. Eustace is a supporting character alongside Puddleglum. I wanted to get your thoughts, Phil, on why do you think it is that Eustace doesn't play such a central role? It's the opposite of what we might expect, because Eustace is our only returning character. Well, I mean, I guess Caspian's coming back a little bit, and so is Trumpkin, but the only returning character who's a significant part of the story, and yet we really don't get much from his perspective.
I feel like Lewis puts the focus on different characters at different times,
Mm-hmm.
and right now the focus is going to be on Jill for the main part. And in addition to that, we have Puddleglum to learn a little bit more about too. So we just haven't heard as much about Eustace. It also seems like when someone comes back to Narnia, they're in somewhat of a transitional role where they're now introducing a new kind of character to Narnia, and so they're not going to have quite as much excitement.
I like that. We can think about that too with the idea of discipleship, right? The idea with Jill and Eustace is that Eustace already had his big moment. He had his big, let's call it a conversion, right? He had his undragoning. He is not the same boy that he was when he first came to Narnia. And so it doesn't mean that there isn't still growth and formation occurring in him. Sanctification, we could even call it, if we want to use some Christian terminology here. But he has already been invited into Aslan's kingdom, right? Whereas Jill, she comes from this wild school.
Yeah.
She doesn't know about Adam and Eve. And she is the one who's experiencing all of this for the first time. And so Eustace takes this more secondary role to disciple her. And it's not the kind of discipleship that is a teaching kind of relationship. It's almost this
Walking alongside.
Exactly. There, and in some Christian circles, we might call it a Barnabas relationship, right? Thinking about Paul and Barnabas's relationship in the New Testament, and that they're more or less equals. Eustace, yeah, he's been here before, but it's not like he has this great knowledge. Or even, at the first chapters, he's trying to evangelize to Jill. He doesn't have any of the right words. He does not have any kind of great training here. He's just somebody who's been invited into the family. And he's excited about that. And so the story's moved away from him into Jill. I like the way you helped me kind of process through some of that.
Yeah. And I'd be interested to see what happens for the rest of the book too, because it could very well flip. And I don't know if either of these two children come back in future books.
That was going to be my next question.
Yeah, we'll see what happens there.
Who's coming back? Or are either of them coming back or none of them?
I would think Eustace, this is going to be his last time. And
This
Jill
is his
gets to
last
come
time.
back.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when does Jill show back up then?
Next book.
Horse and his boy.
Is that set in a different time period?
I'm not going to tell you.
I think it's set in a different time period.
So she doesn't come back then.
She'll come back in 2 books.
In 2 books. The magician's nephew.
No, it doesn't sound right either. Maybe she'll come back for the last battle. Pull an Avengers where she'll disappear for a little bit and then a portal will open up and she'll come back.
You've been watching too much Marvel. Interesting. Okay, this is fun. I love this.
I hope you enjoy it, and I hope everyone else enjoys it too.
I think
it's not easy.
I know. I think people really like hearing you give your predictions here. Yeah. So let's go back now and go back to this scene at the gate.
As we're walking in, or about to walk in, Eustace turns to Jill and says, "I say, he may be a wet blanket, but he has plenty of pluck and cheek," which I assume means courage.
Mm-hmm.
I just really like that line, and I feel like he's doing a good job of. They're both clearly annoyed with Puddleglum at this point, but he's pointing out something positive and expressing gratitude in a weird way. Right before they come inside, the giant looks at them and points out that they have blue faces, and that he didn't think they would have blue faces. And Jill says, "Our faces are only blue with cold. We're not this color, really."
So I guess these are the first humans that these giants have encountered.
Yeah, or maybe in a while.
Time.
Yeah. And they just don't have the long-term memory of that. Or maybe other giants have seen them. But they do seem pretty remote, and they had to walk up a very large staircase to get there, so can't blame them.
The giant calls up a smaller giant. The porter calls up a younger giant and has that young giant go tell the king and the queen, which that kind of came out of nowhere. I did not know we were going to have royalty here in this house.
Yeah. You would have worn something else.
Yeah. To relay this message that they were sent for the autumn feast by the Lady of the Green Kirtle. As that young giant goes off, the porter turns back to Puddleglum and the children. One, he calls Puddleglum Froggy, which does not seem okay.
No.
That seems like very insensitive towards him.
Yeah.
And he then offers...
What a great opportunity to be the bigger person, not call names.
He then offers him a strong drink. So, Phil, were you going to read this paragraph?
Yes. The salt cellar was not very like one of ours, being narrower and more upright. It made quite a good cup for Puddleglum, when the giant set it down on the floor beside him. The children expected Puddleglum to refuse it, distrusting the gentle giants as he did, but he muttered, "It's rather late to be thinking of precautions now that we're inside," and the door shut behind us. Then he sniffed at the liquor. "Smells all right," he said, "but that's nothing to go by. Better make sure," and took a sip. "Tastes all right, too," he said, "but it might do that at the first sip. How does it go on?" He took a larger sip. "Ah," he said, "but is it the same all the way down?" and took another. "There'll be something nasty at the bottom, I shouldn't wonder," he said, and finished the drink. He licked his lips and remarked to the children, "This will be a test, you see. If I curl up or burst or turn into a lizard or something, then you'll know not to take anything they offer you." But the giant, who was too far up to hear the things Puddleglum had been saying under his breath, roared with laughter and said, "Why, Froggy, you're a man. See him put it away." "Not a man. Marshwiggle," replied Puddleglum in a somewhat indistinct voice. "Not Frog either. Marshwiggle." At that moment, the door opened behind them, and a younger giant came in, saying, "They're to go to the throne room at once."
That is one of the funniest sections we've covered in the book.
And the next line has my favorite word.
Keep going.
The children stood up, but Puddleglum remained sitting and said, "Marshwiggle, Marshwiggle. Very respectable Marshwiggle. Respectawiggle."
All right, so this is the first time we've had a character be intoxicated in the Chronicles.
Right.
Is there a lesson here? Is Lewis being funny? What is the main point of Puddleglum's intoxication?
I'm a little curious if Puddleglum has used all his caution up and is now kind of reverting back to some old habits or something, because just the way he takes a sip and then takes another sip and then takes another sip and then very quickly like zooms toward drunk and is no longer able to kind of protect the kids or do anything.
Yeah, and we see that pessimism again. Obviously, it shows up here, and that great part you read is he's continuing to take a sip, and he's like, goes one step further. But we see it there, obviously, he is not continuing to drink it, or at least my read of the passage is not that he is sitting there actually trying it to make sure that it's safe. Instead, he's using it almost as a crutch to explain his actions.
Mm-hmm.
And so in this case, his pessimism is not actually out of precaution. It's as a shield to kind of explain maybe some poor behavior or poor decisions that he's engaging with.
Which is interesting because he's acting as a guide for these children. He's done such a good job of kind of guiding them both in terms of their actual journey, but also just getting them to stop arguing. But then here it all kind of breaks apart out of nowhere.
It's a reoccurring theme throughout the book so far, especially with Jill and the signs. I mean, we didn't talk about it a lot, but earlier in the chapter, as they're going through the trenches, Puddleglum, asks Jill, what's the next sign? And we've been told she repeats them. Now, she hasn't been as good about it, but she knows the 4 signs, and she responds with, bother the signs. She's, I think it's something about Aslan's name, and she's got them wrong. And here's what Lewis says. As you see, she had got the order wrong. That was because she had given up saying the signs over every night. She still really knew them if she troubled to think, but she was no longer so pat in her lesson as to be sure of reeling them off in the right order at a moment's notice and without thinking. Puddleglum's question annoyed her because deep down inside her, she was already annoyed with herself for not knowing the line's lesson quite so well as she felt she ought to have known it. This annoyance, added to the misery of being very cold and tired, made her say bother the signs. She didn't perhaps quite mean it. And thinking about Jill's frustration with the signs and forgetting of the signs, and then comparing that to Puddleglum's drunkenness here at the end of the chapter, I do think that Lewis is playing, both of those scenes are funny. So he's playing it for laughs in some ways, but he's also teaching a lesson in another way. Like I quoted with those scriptures, Jill and Puddleglum are both easily succumb to temptation, to forgetfulness, to just the elements around them when they are not sober-minded. Literally actually sober-minded with in Puddleglum's case. Right? Jill, because she's not repeating those signs every single day, she's not, as David says, she's not meditating on the law day and night. And then Puddleglum, because he's not being watchful. It's almost like you're right. He used up all of that. He's feeding off of his own, not energy. But he's working out of his own ability, and that just isn't enough for him right now. Yeah. He's not looking to Aslan or thinking about Aslan's charge in this.
And it also seems like he feels like, well, we're already in a risky situation, and it is part brave, but it's also a little part foolish, because as soon as they get inside, it almost seems like it doesn't matter anymore. And now he's using this. I need to protect you guys, and so I'm gonna absorb all the alcohol from this drink. But I'm also curious, like maybe he shouldn't have started at all in this case. Maybe it was starting, and like once he tasted it, then he had some more. I'm curious how this will continue to play out.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to cover this in the next chapter. But it is a disappointing choice by Puddleglum here, because now we're left with Jill and Eustace, who love them both, not made the best decisions throughout this book. They haven't necessarily made bad decisions, but they've consistently chose their own comfort and security, or actually not security, but their own comfort over security and over the mission that Aslan has sent them on. And it has been Puddleglum through the last few chapters that has kept them focused. He's helped them fix their eyes upon which the thing which Aslan has given to them, and now he is gone.
Right.
And
partly because of their choice.
Exactly. Like they've almost, he's not some perfect, disciple figure that's, here, let me lead the way and I'm doing it all right. He himself is susceptible to some of the same fears. I think he's just
kind of wore him down.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
We really want to go to Harfang.
And it's like, all right, fine, we'll go. And he almost uses up the last of his courage and maturity to get them inside the door. And that's so exhausting that it's all gone. Just give me this drink so I can forget about my problems. Right. It's too overwhelming for me.
Yeah. It'll be really interesting to see what happens these next few chapters now that that kind of security and guard is eliminated temporarily. and they're going into this unknown, and it seems like there's some foreshadowing that this is not going to be the best place for the children to be.
That is actually a great place for us to end this chapter and for me to ask you to guess what's going to happen in the next chapter.
I think we might find someone that we're looking for.
Okay.
Or, keep in mind, if I remember a little bit about this story.
Okay.
But I feel like we're going to get to the silver chair part of the silver chair.
It's here in Harfang.
It's here in Harfang. That's my guess.
That's exciting. I can't wait to get to potentially that in the next chapter.
I look forward to this clip being replayed next chapter.
in the future. Well, Phil, next time in chapter 8 of The Silver Chair, it's entitled The House of Harfang, by the way. In that chapter, Jill makes a startling discovery regarding one of the signs.
Oh.
Phil, do you remember the 4 signs? Have you been practicing unlike Jill?
First one is you'll
close the
you'll
book.
run
Close
into
it.
an
No,
old
no,
friend.
that's not fair.
No, come on.
Okay, you go.
Let me find it first. Number 1, old friend, and if you greet him, then you'll get some help.
Okay.
2, go north until you find the city of the lost giants.
That's That's kind of close. Yeah. That is right.
Here's my question about that one. Are they at the city of lost giants?
I can't answer that.
Did they accidentally get there, or is this like a house in the burbs as they get
This is
to
outside the city of the lost giants?
outside the city of the giants? I don't know. The third one is something about writing on a stone.
Okay, you're looking at the book at this point.
That'll tell them what to do.
You're trying to make listeners think
And
that you
then
don't
the
have the book
fourth
open.
one,
You go, what's the
Daniel
fourth one?
said that he didn't have to remember them because he's read the book before.
That's true. Just look down and read the fourth one then.
No, I can do this. Let's see. The fourth one is if someone says Aslan's name, then help them.
Yeah, ask them to do something in the name of Aslan. It'll be the first person they've met the entire time to do something in the name of Aslan. So far,
That'll tell you that that's the prince.
Yes. So far, we have only encountered the first sign, and they know they missed it. So if we've done the second or third sign, it's unclear.
Right.
But the only thing we know that happened is they missed the first sign because we didn't talk to Caspian.
Right.
So, like I alluded to, in the next chapter, there will be a startling discovery about one of those signs.
Well, good.
All right. Well, before we go, we have an email from Melinda that I'm going to read for us here. Hi, Phil and Daniel. I hope you guys are doing well. I have been a huge fan of the Lamppost Listener ever since my fiancé Matt told me about y'all last year. I have even found great enjoyment in re-listening to your shows, as I am always up for spending more time in Narnia. I grew up watching the BBC version of the Narnia movies and loved them, but somehow I didn't read the books until I was an adult. At that point, I fell in love with them and have read them all multiple times. Right now, I think my favorite books of the series are The Silver Chair and The Horse and His Boy. They are such beautifully crafted adventure stories with God lessons throughout. Also, I love the final part of the last battle. Every time I read it, I am compelled to stop everything and worship Jesus.
Whoa.
Yeah, I feel intrigued.
Yeah. Go on.
Yeah, I'm sure that's intriguing. I know you guys recently finished the season on Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and I wanted to share how God used that book in an awesome way in my life. Oh, and by the way, I didn't mention it, but the subject of her email is called God Speaks Through Narnia.
Okay.
Back to the email. Several years ago, I went through a dark island of my own, breast cancer. As the shock of receiving this diagnosis at a relatively young age wore off, the possible darkness and fear of the unknown ahead of me loomed like the mouth of a railway tunnel, a tunnel either so long or so twisty that you cannot see the light at the far end. And that's a direct quote from Lewis. Doctors in my hometown advised me of a treatment plan, and we forged ahead. 2 surgeries, radiation, and medication. But after the surgeries, I felt God leading me to get a second opinion from a well-known cancer hospital. There, doctors discovered that my cancer was worse than previously thought, and that I would need more surgery, with possible loss of arm function and chemo in addition to radiation and medication. Not knowing how this would turn out, or how this would affect other health issues I dealt with, fear set in. But God. He had already been encouraging me and speaking hope and purpose over this season of my life. So as Lucy sought Aslan in her physical darkness, I went to the Lord in prayer, surrendering to his plan for my life. He did not alter the darkness surrounding me at that moment, but he did bring light and peace within, as Aslan did in the book for Lucy. In the midst of the dark island of my circumstances, the Holy Spirit was like the albatross, calling out in a strong, sweet voice. His presence with me was such a comfort, and one of his words to me during the difficult time was, "Courage, dear heart." My dad gave me a necklace with that phrase on it, and I wore it to my appointments to remember God's encouragement. And as Aslan delivered Lucy from fear, God helped me to trust that even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will not fear, for you are with me. As Aslan brought Lucy and the Dawn Treader out of the darkness into the sunlight again, the Lord spared me from chemo and sustained me through other treatments. He showed me time and again how he goes before me and prepares my way. And he has covered over that hard time with his grace and has left me with an aftertaste of joy. I am so thankful for the Lord's care of me and his awesome works, and I love that he used Narnia as a means of encouragement. Phil and Daniel, I'm so thankful for you guys and for the fun and informative content of the show. Also, I'm a huge fan of Star Wars, Star Trek, and superhero movie references, so please continue. Take care, and Matt and I will be praying for y'all further up and further in. Melinda.
Wow. That's amazing. Melinda, I really appreciate you sending that in and explaining the story in such detail, and it's just really encouraging. We'll be praying for you too as well.
Yeah, what a great testimony of God's good work. And this is why these books are so important to so many of us, because there is such great truth nestled within inside of them. And because they're written for children, sometimes it's very surface levelly. And I don't mean that in a negative way. We don't have to dig deep and deep to find what Lewis is trying to get at. Right. Often it's right there. I mean, just like Melinda talks about in chapter 12 of Dawn Treader, the Dark Island, it's not hard to see what Lewis is doing there. It's not hard to make connections between, our own lives and what Lucy goes through and the fear that sets in. Really, not just Lucy, but the whole crew of the ship. And this is why we're drawn to the good, the true, and the beautiful in Narnia, because we see these same things in our life, even in the midst of dark and despairing times like Melinda talks about. And so, Melinda, thank you so much for reaching out. Thank you for sharing this wonderful testimony. And again, we will continue to be praying for you and for your fiance, Matt. And this is not serious at all, but I'm also glad she likes the Star Wars, Star Trek.
Right.
And
I feel very vindicated.
And we had a lot of Star Trek references. You don't watch Trek. That's me.
Well, we've disagreed about this, and I hate to remind you, but I really like the latest movies.
That's
and
fine.
I really, really like Into Darkness. And I
know that is wrong.
I knew this was going to happen. Hope this doesn't destroy our podcasting friendship.
That's your Star Trek Into Darkness.
I thoroughly enjoyed that movie.
Have you seen The Wrath of Khan?
Yes, but I saw it after.
Okay. I think we watched it together.
No, I saw it.
I watched it with Sarah Jane.
I saw it, and then Will Shatner came out on stage and answered people's questions.
Wait, are you serious?
Yeah, it was.
You
great.
got to see William Shatner.
Yeah.
Where was this?
Oh, we hang out.
Oh, it was at his house.
Probably every 29 years or so.
I want to know, where did you?
This was at the theater in town.
That's awesome. He was here? I didn't know that. I'm honestly not a big TOS fan. I'm Next Generation. You know what I've been watching, interestingly enough? This is a little off topic. Is I've been watching Enterprise, which was like one of the more panned show. It's not like one of the best ones, a lot of people think. And I've enjoyed Scott Bakula doing a great job. It feels the most modern of besides Discovery, but it feels the most modern because it was filmed in the 2000s and it doesn't feel like 80s and 90s. Not that that's a bad thing,
right?
But it does.
But it does affect how you're viewing it, especially if you grew up when we did.
Exactly. So I've been enjoying watching that. I was watching a lot of before we went back to school with feeding the baby late at night. I'd be like, let's watch an episode of Star Trek. So.
Yeah. Okay, so it sounds like what the people want is more Star Trek references. We can definitely do that.
Yeah, we'll put that in. We've also gotten other emails from people who are like, please cut out the Star Trek and Star Wars references. So
maybe that could be a Patreon bonus. We'll provide a link to all.
We'll cut out all the references.
It's shorter episodes without references.
There you go. Oh, see, I was thinking the opposite. So on the main
more
feed,
references.
You're saying in Patreon, what we do is we have hey, if you don't want to listen to all the other references, you got to go to Patreon. I was thinking the opposite, which is like it will only have references where there's no Narnia. I'll cut out every reference. Like here's the same episode, but we don't speak about Narnia. Well, that's a great, fun way to end. And again, Melinda, I know we already said it, but thank you again for that great email. And I'm glad that you're enjoying the show, even re-listening. So that's fun to hear.
Well, I'll wrap us up here. This episode is made possible by our patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support the show, you can listen to a bonus episode each month, along with other rewards. Special thanks goes to Elias Dean, Hannah Anderson, John Marr, and Emily Margaret for supporting us at our top tiers. You can follow us into Narnia on our Twitter or Facebook pages. If you have any feedback, please email us at thenarniapodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 406-646-6733. A review on Apple Podcasts would be appreciated. It helps other listeners find the show and join our read-through. If you subscribe, you will wake up to a new episode every other Wednesday. Thank you for coming along on this journey, and we'll be back next time with Chapter 8.